If you spend enough time in the windowless basements of municipal archives, specifically in cities that were established before the mid-19th century, you will eventually find a pattern that the modern architectural record has chosen to erase. It is a recurring anomaly in the blueprints of brownstones, townhouses, and limestone manors constructed between 1750 and 1870. Tucked away near the geometric center of these structures, often at the precise point where the primary load-bearing walls converge, there is a small, windowless room. On some plans, it is labeled as a still room. On others, it is simply left blank, an intentional void in the geometry of the home. By the turn of the 20th century, these spaces had almost entirely vanished from the physical world. They were filled with brick, converted into narrow utility closets, or integrated into the emerging loud networks of indoor plumbing and electrical wiring. This was the spirit room. To understand why every home once required a dedicated space for silence, we have to look at the world before the Great Standardization. The acoustic environment of the 19th century was not a chaotic collection of noise. It was a localized, organic resonance. Every community on this planet was anchored to a specific frequency, usually produced by the largest local resonator, a church organ or a massive bronze bell. These frequencies were never arbitrary. They were matched to the specific stone of the local quarry, the humidity of the region, and the geological foundation upon which the town was built. A village in the Swiss Alps vibrated at a different frequency than a port city in the Mediterranean. Every place had its own voice. The bells in your village rang at a pitch specific to your village, and the architecture of your home was designed to be the final, most intimate extension of that acoustic ecosystem. Just as Gothic cathedrals were engineered as monumental instruments, with reverberation times designed to amplify specific tones, the private residence was intended to be a smaller, personal resonator. The spirit room was the tuning fork of the house. It was a space designed for resonance, constructed with the same crystalline limestone and specific mortar that medieval builders used to conduct sound waves. It was not a place for ghosts in the way the sensationalist Victorian spiritualists later claimed. It was a place for the house to breathe in unison with the bells and the organs of the community. We have physical proof of how sophisticated this understanding of sound actually was. In 2016, researchers at Greek universities used sine wave sweeps to map the acoustic properties of ancient churches. They discovered that architects had made deliberate design choices based on sound, physically embedding clay pots, called amphorae, into the walls and domes to amplify specific resonant frequencies. This was not a technology exclusive to cathedrals. The spirit room in a mid-19th century home operated on a similar principle. It was a hollow resonator, often containing nothing but the structural pillars that anchored the house to the earth. When the village bell rang, the house did not just sit in the path of the sound, it participated in it. The stone amplified the bronze amplified the voice, and the spirit room acted as the central amplifier for the family dwelling. For centuries, the entire acoustic environment of a community vibrated at frequencies that belonged to that place and nowhere else. And then, the year 1870 arrived. This was a decade of resets, both physical and legal. As we see in the records of the London Royal Philharmonic, which swung its tuning standard from 433 to 455 Hz during this period, the world's acoustic references were being forcibly shifted. In 1859, the French government passed the first law in human history that dictated the pitch of music by legal statute, the Diapason Normal. Governments, for the first time, found it necessary to legislate the vibration rate of sound. What followed was the physical destruction of the old resonators. Between the revolutions, the world wars, and government decrees, at least 425,000 documented church bells were physically eliminated from the European landscape. Each was a precision instrument, an acoustic reference point for its community, and when they were melted for cannons and industrial material, the old frequencies died with them. The replacement bells were tuned to the new government standards, like the 440 Hz reference tone that the United States Bureau of Standards began transmitting in 1936. The death of the spirit room coincided exactly with this acoustic purge. As the bells vanished, the rooms became dead. An instrument is only as functional as the frequency that feeds it. Without the original local resonance of the bronze bells, the spirit rooms in private homes began to produce what researchers call muddy or flat frequencies. The very spaces designed to harmonize the family with the earth began to feel oppressive, dark, and wrong. The solution offered by emerging industrial governments was not to restore the bells, but to sanitize the home. Under the guise of the hygiene movement and the new building codes of the late 1800s, homeowners were encouraged and eventually forced to eliminate these unproductive spaces. The still room was replaced by the utility room. The crystalline limestone was covered with drywall, and the resonant wood floors were muffled with heavy carpets. Acoustics researchers have noted that modern materials like drywall and foam panels are too dead for singing, too lived for speech. We have moved from houses that were generators of resonance into houses that are merely containers for amplified noise. Instead of a room that naturally amplifies the healing frequencies of the local landscape, we have a network of copper wires and radio towers broadcasting a single, global standard. The local frequency died, and the national one took its place. Consider the metallurgy of the bells that were destroyed. These were not just hunks of metal. They were the product of hereditary knowledge, passed from father to son across generations of foundry families. The specific voice of a bell was determined by the precise ratio of copper to tin, the cooling time, and the subterranean conditions of the foundry pit. When the Soviet government ordered the melting of 1 million bells in 1929, they didn't just destroy the bronze, they destroyed the physical record of the Earth's local vibration. When the foundries tried to reopen decades later, they realized the knowledge was gone. They could cast a bell that looked the same, but it could no longer quote 12 to the stone of the cathedrals. The quote 13 was tuned to that talk. If you stand in a house built in 1840, the walls are often twice as thick as a modern home. This wasn't just for insulation, it was for mass. Mass is required to hold a low-frequency standing wave. The spirit room served as the empty belly of the architecture, allowing these low frequencies to pool and circulate. When you removed the room, you didn't just lose space, you lost the house's ability to ground the people living inside it. This explains the nervous exhaustion that became a medical epidemic in the late 1880s. The exact moment these rooms were being phased out. People were living in houses that were acoustically starving. We have been taught to look at the 1870 building codes as a triumph of safety. We are told that the great fires of Chicago, London, and Boston required the removal of hollow spaces to prevent the spread of flames. But look at what they replaced those spaces with. They replaced the still room with a mechanical room. They replaced the limestone with gypsum and paper. They replaced the natural resonance of the earth with the 60-cycle hum of electricity. We didn't just change our architecture, we changed our biological environment. A study conducted in 2016 exposed 33 volunteers to music at both 432 and 440 Hz. The 432 group showed measurable decreases in heart rate and reported feeling more focused. If a small shift in a recorded track can do that, imagine the physiological impact of living 24 hours a day inside a building that is vibrating at a frequency chosen by a government committee in London or Vienna. The quote _2__ was the only place where a human being could escape that artificial overlay and return to the ground tone of their specific patch of earth. One acoustics researcher studying Orthodox architecture made an observation that should stop us cold. He wondered whether the builders considered the reverberant sound to be the quote underscore 3 underscore for whom the spaces were actually constructed. If that is true, then what happens when the sound is removed? We are left with buildings that are standing but empty. We have the architecture, the stone, and the proportions, but nothing is feeding the instrument. The quote 4 was the heart of a system where stone, bronze, and voice hummed in a unified resonance. A feedback loop matched to architecture down to the molecular properties of the limestone. Modern architecture tells us that these changes were progress. They tell us that standardization allowed for the mass production of instruments and the global broadcast of information. But they do not tell us what that standardization did to the human body. We are the first generations in history to live in a world that is acoustically dead. We have microphones to compensate. We have noise-canceling headphones to block the industrial hum. But we no longer have the resonance. The buildings that were designed to hold the old sound still stand, but nothing feeds them anymore. The stone remembers what the world chose to forget. If you go into the center of an old house today, you will often find a closet that makes no sense. It's too small for a coat, too deep for a shelf. Sometimes, if you knock on the back wall, it sounds hollow. This is where they buried the quote 5. They told us it was for our safety. They told us it was for efficiency. But the actual history suggests that they just didn't want us to hear the world as it actually was. They wanted one pitch for every instrument, every orchestra, every recording, and every home. They replaced 1,000 local voices with a single global broadcast. And they made sure we had nowhere left to go to remember the difference. The question nobody seems willing to ask is not which frequency is right, but what was the sound doing when the building and the bell and the voice were all tuned to the same pitch? What happened inside that resonance that we no longer experience? What did those buildings actually do when they were operating as designed? We have the evidence that these spaces were engineered for sound, with a sophistication we are only now beginning to document. What we do not have is the frequency. That melted with the bronze. The spirit room wasn't replaced by a closet. It was replaced by a standardized silence that we have been taught to call normal. But the silence is not normal. It is a vacuum. We live in boxes that were once instruments, wondering why we feel so disconnected from the spaces we call home. We are surrounded by stone that is waiting to resonate, by, quote 1, embedded in walls that haven't been fed a proper tone in a century. We are living in a giant silent orchestra, where the instruments are still on the stage, but the musicians have forgotten how to play. The spirit room remains as a silent witness to a resonance we no longer know how to feed. When the 1890 census records were lost in a fire, we lost the names of millions. When the bells were melted, we lost the sound of the world. And when the spirit room was bricked over, we lost our connection to the earth beneath our feet. This transformation was the largest acoustic experiment in human history, conducted without our consent across 3 centuries. We traded the unique, healing resonance of our local earth for a global broadcast. We traded stone instruments for drywall boxes. The spirit room is gone, but the architecture of our houses still waits for a sound that no longer exists. We must ask ourselves why the Hygiene Movement was so obsessed with removing hollow spaces. If the goal was truly health, why did the health of the population decline exactly as the resonance rooms disappeared? Why did the modern house become a place of stress rather than a place of recovery? The answer is hidden in the frequencies. A house without a spirit room is a house without a ground. It is an ungrounded electrical circuit. We are the current, and we have nowhere to discharge. The stone of a cathedral or an old manor is a crystalline structure. Under pressure, crystalline structures produce a piezoelectric effect. They generate electricity. If the spirit room was designed to focus the resonance of the bells onto those crystalline walls, then these houses weren't just, quote, 10, quote. They were power plants for the human nervous system. They were charging stations. When the bells stopped ringing at the local frequency, the quote, 11 quote, stopped working. This is the actual history that the quote 12 quote of 1870 tried to bury. They didn't just burn the cities, they changed the way the cities felt. They moved us from a world of active resonance into a world of passive consumption. We no longer generate our own sound, we listen to theirs. We no longer ground ourselves in the stone of our homes, we insulate ourselves with plastic and foam. The spirit room was the last defense against this standardization, and its removal was the final step in making us a global, uniform population. Look at the surviving still rooms in the few houses that escaped the 1870 renovations. They are perfectly silent, yet they feel charged. They are the empty spaces that allow the rest of the house to function. Without the void at the center, the geometry of the home collapses into a mere collection of rooms. The spirit room gave the house a center of gravity. It gave the family a point of convergence. Without it, we are just occupants of a container. The buildings are still waiting. The amphorae are still in the walls. The crystalline limestone is still capable of generating the piezoelectric charge. The instrument is intact. It just hasn't been played in 150 years. The founders who knew the secret frequencies are gone, their knowledge turned into cannons and coins. But the stone remembers. The underscore quote, underscore 0. Underscore wasn't just a room, it was a promise that we belonged to the place where we lived. And until we find a way to feed that resonance again, we will continue to feel like strangers in our own homes, living in the silence of a world that was once meant to sing. We are told that we have more information than any generation in history. We have the internet in our pockets, but we have less resonance. We have more noise, but less sound. The spirit room was a place where information was unnecessary because the frequency was enough. It was a place where you didn't have to quote 3 about being connected to the world. You could feel it in your bones. Every time the bell in the square hit its mark, every person and every quote 4 in the village felt the same pulse. It was a physical, biological unity that required no radio, no wires, and no laws. This is what they took from us. They didn't just take the rooms, they took the unity. They replaced the shared biological resonance of the community with the individual, isolated consumption of the modern era. They replaced the spirit room with the television room. They replaced the frequency of the earth with the frequency of the broadcast. And they did it so slowly, across so many wars and so many building codes, that we forgot it was ever any other way. We are the children of the silence, living in the ruins of a resonant world, wondering why the stone feels so cold. But if you find yourself in an old house, standing in a closet that shouldn't be there, or a basement corner that feels strangely underscore quote underscore 7 underscore stop, don't look for ghosts, look for the resonance. Listen for the hum that the stone is still trying to hold. The spirit room is still there, beneath the drywall, behind the brick, waiting for the bells to return. It is the silent heart of the old world, and it is the only part of our homes that they could never truly destroy. They could only make us forget how to use it. The story of the spirit room is not a ghost story. It is a story of lost technology. It is a story of how we were moved from a biological resonance into a mechanical one. It is a story of the 1870 reset, the year the world went quiet, and the standardization began. We have the architecture. We have the proof. All we are missing is the frequency. And as long as the stone stands, the possibility of that resonance remains. The spirit room is not a relic of the past. It is a blueprint for a future we have yet to reclaim. Every house built before 1870 had a spirit room. This is what they replaced it with: a box, a broadcast, and a silence we were never meant to inhabit. The next time you walk through an old city, don't look at the facades. Look for the voids. Look for the spaces they tried to fill, because in those empty rooms lies the secret of what we used to be, and the frequency of a world that they haven't quite managed to erase. the stone still remembers. And if you listen closely enough, you might realize that you do too.